Good morning. It's Ladina Boo again, and our show is called Trials and Triumphs. My guest today, we've seen him before. This is Jared Deeds. He is here going to tell us more about his time in prison and, you know, how he came out of prison and everything. We've talked before about his accident, and I'll remind people again, he had a major accident. Some guy hit him at 100 miles an hour, and so he had some brain issues and memory issues, but most of it's coming back now. So he's doing well. God is providing that information for him. And we wanted to discuss his time in prison because that is part of his testimony as to, how he got where he's at right now and the life with his family, his wife, and his child, and everything. So, anyway, good morning, Jared. It's good for you to come today.
Good morning. Glad to be back.
Yep. Well, I thank you immensely for agreeing to come back again.
Oh, certainly. Anything to help the Lord, further the cause for the Lord.
Yep.
Whatever
It's
works.
but I do advise you do not drive by faith.
Don't try my faith.
Don't drive by faith because you have to open your eyes once in a while. But anything else, let the Lord lead you in faith.
Right.
So anyway, you want to go ahead and start telling us about how you ended up in prison and where and
Oh,
the
certainly,
situation
certainly.
there.
So for me, it went pretty good up until I want to say 30, somewhere in there. I had been, as you know, ex, drug addict, ex drug seller. Um, had spent actually even years before that not doing any of that stuff. Just sold it to, of course, fund my lifestyle. And I remember that everything started going downhill when I started actually using the drugs, and it was no longer selling it. That I soon found myself in one of those, compromising situations. I found the police ended up started looking for me. This was back in Washington State. This was, as you know, I was born in Alaska, and we moved to Washington State when I was only about 6 months old. And so I'd spent the majority of my life in Washington State, and we really lived in a town called Mount Vernon, Washington, and there really wasn't all that much to it. It's just a nice little town out in Washington State. And of course, what eventually made me popular when I, grew up and started doing all these wrong things was of course, I don't know who it was, but somebody had ratted me out to the police to get off on one of their charges, which put me in the spotlight of the police, and then they identified me as a dealer. And so that brought in the police into the situation. And when you correlate this timeline with where I was in life, along with of course the police coming in, this is towards I want to say about a year of being addicted to using drugs, and that downgrade that I'd previously
Mhm.
been telling you about. That's about where it correlates in there. It was definitely one of those points where I could quickly identify that everything was cascading downhill really quickly, and it was pretty much getting to a point where I had to deal with this thing, or it was gonna get really out of control. And so, um, when you're in active addiction, you don't particularly care that battling these things. I mean, it means something to you, but you're more concerned about how to get out of the problem than you are really about the problem. It's more like I just want to get this thing, you know, off my back. I don't really care, you really don't care for it.
Yeah, you don't want the police following you around.
Exactly, especially when you're a drug dealer.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're trying to, drum up customers, and you got police literally tailing. I had police tailing behind me all the time, and they would, I don't know what they were doing back there, but they literally would trail behind me, and then they'd pick a point where they're just like, oh, all right, let's just hit the lights on Jared and let's pull him over and you know
What's
play 20 questions, and I play dumb, of course, and the
yeah?
standard story.
I know my son went through that for a while when I lived up in the Kansas City area. He would he was an alcoholic and he'd get out and drive and the police would follow his car and pull it over, no matter what. And so it got to the point where he wouldn't even drive his car. He'd have somebody else drive it. And, we'd hear the officers, we have recordings of him saying, that's not Chris.
Yep. I wish I kind of back when I was doing all that bad stuff. I mean, I wish I could say that I was that inventive, but really, I never really thought up those kind of things. It was more. I ended up making in between your where you lift up your little middle console there. I had one where I could quickly unscrew the 4 bolts on it and lift that thing up out of there, and down by my emergency brake in the middle, I could set the drugs in there and then put the thing back down, screw it back on really fast, and then dispose of the tool in my hand where the police didn't see it. And oddly enough, the police never got really smart enough to figure out that I had always been stashing the drugs in there. So before, of course, I would move my vehicle, or I would leave a location where I know that, hey, the police could pull me over at any point. I would always open up that dash real quick, and it only took about 30 seconds. Put the drugs in there, hide it really good, because it was actually a good spot, because there's a little hidden spot that you could just literally tuck it in there, and it was like a perfect holder for the drugs at the time, and it worked out great to conceal it. And
Didn't have a
um,
lot of drug dogs up there, did they?
they really didn't. Not
Hmm.
at this time. I want to say it was back in the. I want to say, if my memory's not wrong, I want to say it's around the 90s or so.
Hmm.
And of course, dogs had been introduced, but it was more of a, we're not going to call dogs out unless you're big time, and they don't want to
Right.
mess with those dogs at that point. But of course, nowadays it'd be a different story. They'd probably pull them out for anybody who's a
Hmm.
drug dealer. But back in those days, they would only threaten to bring him out, which actually happened one time. Had a cop playing back and forth with me, and he's like, "Well, I know you're a drug dealer, this and that. I know you're carrying drugs on you." And I'm like, "Yep, where?" You got nothing. And Washington State had more strict laws, and your cops really couldn't touch you
Hmm.
unless you were unless there was something they could prove, and it was harder to prove back then.
Right.
You can pretty much flaunt this stuff in their face. I mean, I got caught with a little side story here. I got caught with uh, meth pipe once before, and I think it was only like a $20 bag of meth, and I beat the charge because the officer, when he was doing the search, had conducted the search incorrectly, and it actually led to me getting off the hook, of course, and they had to drop the charges even though they were completely solid
Yeah.
on what they had, just because that one little error he made. I was able to beat the entire thing.
Hmm.
But so back to my story. I kept fighting with them for probably about a year. I think I was fighting the police there, uh, pretty much became an everyday thing. And I was, of course, running from the law. I had warrants. I had, you know, getting seeking, bleh, can't talk today, sinking deeper into not just only the drugs, but the bad part of that lifestyle that comes with it. Finding myself really slipping on everything. The things I would do wrong I was increasing on how much stuff I would, how far I'd be willing to take things, and it was really the downslide of where I hit probably the worst area as far as what I felt was uh, what my standards were,
Mm-hmm.
and ended up eventually leading me to prison, of course. But the funny thing is, I didn't actually go to prison until I left Washington State.
Yeah. Uh, it's amazing how that works. You're trying to go someplace else, make a new start, and this stuff will follow you
Oh yeah,
and
it will.
put you in a deep, dark hole.
And I think a lot of it had to do again with the time of Washington State laws and versus like Missouri, where here it's so different. There's just not the same application of the law.
Hmm.
The police or things here are, they can have more power as far as exercising what they're going to do and when they do it. Anyway, so I ended up, as most people have been listening know, I left Washington State to move down here when me and my now wife were going to have our kid. That was a transition out of Washington State down here to Missouri, and we decided that it would be best to start over, which actually backfired, of course.
Hmm.
We ended up both of us in jail, and both of us had never been to jail. I had I had I think it was only one overnight, uh, maybe two times before the transition, and I beat all that stuff. They just couldn't pin nothing on me in Washington State, and other than like traffic tickets and stuff, just petty things, they couldn't pin anything on me. Um, but when I got down here, it was a whole different story. Excuse me. I found myself. I want to say it was within the first 6 months I was in jail here, and that actually started the process of going in and out of jail. I had spent roughly about 2 years in jail over the length of the entire time that I had been incarcerated, and I was in active addiction, and of course I was trying to, as you know, beat these things and trying to always stay one step one step ahead of the law. You know, try to stay obviously keep the drugs on me. Try to keep high. Try to keep selling. Try to keep moving things. Just trying to keep the lifestyle going. And when I ended up in jail the first time, it was, I have to admit, it was kind of intimidating when you first walk into a
Hmm.
jail. You're just like, wow, what's going on? This is a whole different world, and it really is. There's I get underworld, like a darkness to that place that every jail has, like, because the people there are not per se bad people, but at that time they're doing bad things in their
Yeah,
life,
they're
and that's
doing.
what brings them to that.
Yeah, and a lot of them don't want to crawl out of that hole.
No,
They prefer that style of living, and
absolutely.
those are the ones that break my heart. It's like there's so much more.
Yeah, and how easy sometimes the devil really gets you. Actually, not even the devil. You do it to yourself. I mean, you just jump right in, and you're like, well, this seems like a good time, and before you know it, you're sitting behind jail,
Hmm.
locked up in those bars. But I would say the beginning of what actually got me in jail here was, of course, was drugs, as everybody pretty much knows. I ended up, I can't really think from my memory thing what caused it, but I know it's drug related, but I can't quite remember exactly what happened there.
Hmm.
And I just know that I'd been having problems with the police, and that I was, I was having a, you know, out stealing and doing things, stupid stuff that, I'd never really done a whole bunch before that. Of course, I'd done it, but not to this extent. Like it
Hmm.
got really bad, and of course, again, those laws are different, so it was harder in Washington State for them to pin something on me. So here is a whole different story, and so I know that all these crimes that I had committed had suddenly just, like, within a short span of time, I started getting charges filed on me and everything else. And this is a thing that, again, just Washington State wasn't doing that kind of thing at that
Hmm.
time. It was a whole different process. And here it was like, boom, charges, charges, charges. And I remember one of them, oh, thank you, Lord. One of them was probably the worst one was this. I was trying to help fix a vehicle, and um, I was doing it pro bono, of course, free,
Hmm.
and it ended up actually getting a charge from it, and that's what actually kind of kicked off my whole prison time. And it wasn't even a drug charge, and as a what they call joyriding, in a vehicle, and um, the funny thing about that is it just brought down all these other charges with it, like this whole all of a sudden I'm just like, I got like 6 or 7 pending charges, and I'm like, well, that's, 2 or 3 of them are felonies or something like that. And I'm like, wow, this has happened so suddenly. I
Hmm.
find myself now I'm in jail, and trying to get support from my family, and they're not having it, and they're like, well, this is, better that you just stay in jail, better that you know maybe this would be good for you, kind of thing.
I did that with my son a couple of times. It's like, there's a time when you have to cut off your child.
Oh, absolutely.
And, I did that with my son a couple of times, and people thought I was the meanest individual on the face of the earth. And
They
it's
always
like,
do.
no, I'm not being mean. He understands why I'm not doing it. So, I don't need the judgment over the fact that I want to help my son. I don't want him in jail. I don't want him drinking all the time.
Oh, exactly. And that's a lot of that process is actually just allowing these, what loved ones to go through that, so that there
Hmm.
can be a restoration. But it doesn't happen until you're willing to let go of the control and
Right.
basically let go, let God, and then you can, let them get to a point where they will get that help. And oftentimes jail is unfortunately the wake up call.
Right.
It was my wake up call when I got to jail, and I started going, man, this is a whole different environment, because, let's face it, the people are not nice, most of them.
No, they're not nice. And, I don't know if you found that when you were in jail or prison. It's like you can still get the drugs and stuff if you want to in
Oh,
prisons.
absolutely. If you had the money, you could get high.
Hmm.
Eh,
And so, you've got to change your mindset
Oh,
because it's
absolutely.
all going to be available to you, even if you go to prison, even if you go to jail. But, you have to change your mindset so that you don't want to get drugged down into that.
Exactly. And the time in jail is actually a time for reflection, and looking at, what's going on in your life, and it gives you that
Hmm.
pause.
Right.
And without that pause, you really have nothing. So,
Yeah, because if you're running around looking for drugs all the time, you don't have time to think about your own situation and your own mindset and, where you're going to be 5 years from
oh yeah,
now.
yeah, because you're so focused on what you're doing now, you're just, you just never stop to what's going to happen to me. And so, well, I was in, of course, in jail, and I was trying to, beat these repeated processes of these charges that kept coming up. Uh, Ended up finding myself, and this is where I feel like I was led of like God, because in between my going in and out of jail, I hit a point where suddenly, my testimony, I tell you, where I was down in that under the street there, and I was using drugs and had this like depressive moment come over me, and it was probably about 5 months or so. I was dealing with this like just this moment of like absolute darkness and depression, and so that's where my testimony is on the praying to this so-called God, if there was one. If I'd serve him for the rest of his life, he'd just help get me out of this, where I'm at. And as you know, I ended up, of course, jumping in and out of jail, jumping through all these problems, and this is kind of where God introduced himself. And then I found myself, willing to, after the raid, to go to jail to be able to allow God to fix my life. But there's that process. You have to stop and allow God in and allow God to fix things. And most people don't want to like where God wants them to be worked on.
Hmm.
For
Yeah.
me, it was prison. So, it could be different for anybody else, but for me, that was where God wanted me to put me, because it was the only available option to give me a free food, free, place to live, free this, free that.
Three
It's not,
huts and a cot, and
yeah, it's not of course, it's a harsh environment, but you know, the one thing I can say is God was always in that jail cell with me,
hmm.
and he actually he healed my fibromyalgia, healed me, was working on my memory. I mean, God was moving when I was in jail.
Hmm.
I mean, I had people being stabbed. I had people, you know, being raped. There's things happening in there. There's, drugs floating around everywhere. There's,
Drugs and alcohol.
yeah,
They can make it.
knives, gun, whatever. I mean, it was a real environment. You had fights all the time. People were, you know, I mean, I must have witnessed probably 4 or 5 fights just in, nothing flat.
Hmm.
And some of them, I mean, were, especially one of them was so bad. I mean, the shower was just blood everywhere.
Hmm.
It was bad.
It's not a pleasant place to be, and I don't want to see anybody having to go to jail or prison. But if the people that are going into jail or prison have no desire to change their ways, they just bring all of that stuff into the prison system, and they don't take the time to reflect on what they've done or make any changes.
Exactly. But there still has to, it's all about that time and to be able to process and do it. And that's where you unfortunately find your time to process is in jail.
Hmm.
And so, you know, I mean, I witnessed fight after fight. I mean, we had stabbings, we had rape, we had all sorts of things happening, and we had drugs flowing around. I mean, it was all there. I mean, everything you could possibly imagine was there. And that's the dark underside of jail is all that stuff is still there. That's out there. It's just more confined into an environment because now you've brought, you know, a lot of the worst right behind doors, and it's isolated.
Hmm.
So now you've got a whole bunch of criminals, whole bunch of things that happen brought in under a single roof, basically. And I would say probably the the worst of it was during my time. I actually got I got into the drug rehabilitation program, and they sent me up for a shocker, a 120 treatment,
Mhm.
and that was probably the worst of it because that's where most of what I encountered happened, and it was during this time that God was able to work on my life as he had put me in jail for from the raid, and I was like, well, I'm gonna use the most of this opportunity. This is where I started looking at, what is this God thing and who is he and what's he all about kind of thing.
Mhm.
And it led me to not only just look at God, but step back and look at my life and everything happening. And I just went a whole different direction. I said, man, I started realizing what I had been doing, and I'm like, man, this is stupid. What am I doing all this for?
Yeah.
And and God, I really didn't know anything about God. I didn't almost. I've been in a church, of course. I've done all that stuff, and everybody says that heard about God or know God, but they don't know Him, and that was me. I mean, I've been to church enough to I've heard of God plenty of times, but I didn't know Him,
Mhm.
and so this was that whole time I got to just sit back and get to know God, of course, in the worst possible environment, but I mean, better than being dead.
You know,
So
he was there.
he was definitely there.
I feel sorry for the people in prison that don't take the time to figure out how they got there and how to stay out of there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
My son called me the first time he was arrested. Well, the first time he went to prison, and I went to see him. He tried telling me he was in the shower for 3 months or 4 months, whatever. I call his house and his room. They say, oh, he's in the shower, and it's like, he's not that clean. I know better. So they finally told me he was in prison, and I went up to see him, and that was the first time that my son ever looked at me, and he knew the Lord, and he looked at me and he says, "Mom, I don't want to come back here anymore, and I don't want to go to hell." He says, "I've already been here. This is hell, and I don't want to ever set foot in hell again."
Oh, some people it definitely is hell. Um, but again, I had the Lord behind me the whole way. Thankfully, I really didn't encounter all that much personally myself. I mean, all this stuff was happening. I mean, I witnessed it, but thank I can thank God that I never actually had anything happen to me. I had plenty of muscle in that place protecting me. So
Mm-hmm.
um, one of them was this favorite ex-marine that I knew. That guy was one tough guy. You don't mess with that dude. Marines are Marines are something else. You don't want to mess with those guys.
Mm-hmm.
But the Lord. I want to say it was probably the Lord. I never did ask God, but I assume, of course, naturally it was God. But there was a Marine there for the most of my time protecting me. So that was a blessing. And I know that during all this time, everything that I went through, I know that God was there with me, and He was working on my life. And I know that's the only place you can really sometimes put yourself to really fix yourself. And I mean, jail cells and dealing with these fellow criminals, and uh, everybody paints such a bad light on it, but it's also where you can find God and find your place in life.
Yeah. And focus on what you've done.
Exactly.
How if you take that opportunity. I think there's so many people going back to prison and prison and prison and prison is because they don't take the opportunity to find a different way of dealing with life.
Yeah. And so when I found myself through that process and finding God, it was it was a welcome change of reality for me.
Mm-hmm.
I found of course, when I found God, he started doing wonderful things, just showing me how different things can be.
Hmm.
And I don't have to live this lifestyle, drugs, alcohol, or not alcohol, but drugs, women, things that you know were crime, theft, whatever. um you don't have to live those things. Like, you could live a biblical life, and things can be great, but you have to let go of all these bad things.
Yeah, and you have to remember, I want to put this in here real quick. God can bring you out of these things, and God can help put you on your feet and keep you on your feet. But God is not going to play favorites with you, and you can't make promises to God that you aren't able to keep. Life is not going to be picture perfect just because you've accepted the Lord.
No, I mean, you're still going to have the same struggles and the same muck. The only thing is, you'll actually have God behind you and helping you, carry you literally through your struggle, instead of you doing it under your own power.
Yeah, it's a support system that people don't understand.
Yeah.
You know,
You have to, just give, give God the opportunity to carry you through it. I remember back, of course, after I got out of jail, and after I got my life put together. I ended up going down to Kansas. I want to say it was a big town down there, Kansas City, I think, Missouri,
hmm.
something like that. And there's a church that play, and I don't remember the name of it, but they play music 24/7 without stopping.
Hmm.
and and they also have a prophetic ministry. And I went, and I got a wonderful, um, I got a whole entire, like, uh, prophecy put over me. And one of the parts of those prophecy talks about God was meeting me step by step, hip by hip. So he's standing right there, uh, carrying me, and we're so aligned that his hip matches my hip, and we're walking together, and more or less him carrying me, and he's there the whole way. And the image, what I get the image of, is just the protection, that it's no longer just me.
Hmm.
I've got him at my hip, going through this with me.
Right.
And so I think, as you're saying, that's where a lot of people miss. It's no longer just you.
Right.
And that's where you have to allow yourself to be, put in a place where you can have God get behind you and join you.
Yeah. It's a support system. You may not see him. You can't
Well, you
physically
definitely
see.
won't see him.
You can't physically see him,
Yeah, you can't
but
physically.
within your mind and your heart and your soul, you know that this loving God is trying to help you walk the line that he actually set for you.
Oh,
He
yeah.
never wants anybody to be a drug addict or
No, yeah.
alcoholic.
No.
You know.
God never, and, over all my struggles in life, after I found the Lord, I realized it isn't for me to hold on to how bad it was or what I went through, but to share for somebody else, to get something out of it. And that, uh, God tells me every once in a while. He says, "What you went through was never for you.
Right.
It's never for me.
Yeah.
It's always for somebody else."
Yeah, it's a testimony you give to somebody else that's in a bad spot that can relate to your story, because when they see somebody else who is able to pull themselves out of that hole, that's a blessing to them.
Oh,
It gives
yeah.
them a hope and a feeling of, contentment that they can work towards.
Oh, yeah. And going back to the jail thing again, when I was in and out of those, well, I guess you'd say that better, the longer stint when I had found God, I had spent the majority of my time in prison was spent with God, because this was that time frame where I had found God. And one of the great things about, allowing yourself to stop and allow God to come in is he just he'll take you step by step into your restoration process, helping you make helping you to make those decisions you can't make um, correctly under your own power. You know, a lot of people, we get fooled in life that, you know, we could figure all this out, that it's just a process of, well, if I do this, this will happen, if I do that, this will happen. But really, we don't know what the correct answer is, so we have to yield to that higher power.
Right.
And during that whole prison time, I was watching God put my life back in place. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like, everything was being reconnected, but it only came after I surrendered to God.
Right.
Beforehand, it was just all straight downhill and straight for the, as far as I could push it down. It was like that, that roller coaster into hell. How far I wanted to go was up to me.
Mm-hmm.
I took it down pretty far. But God was gracious enough to give me the opportunity to serve him and come up out of it. And even now, through all my struggles, I know for absolute fact that I would rather have God with me than try to do this without God.
Yep.
I mean, everything I've ever gone through, there's nothing that compares to having God right there to help you carry these things, especially when you really feel like, man, it's really on you and you just can't get this thing off you. And just, sometimes, or actually more than sometimes, for me at least, I find just, one prayer and God's right there. Hey, don't worry about it. I got you.
That's right.
And you find
Yeah.
you find yourself surrounded by his love, and he, and just is so loving about how he cares for you and taking you through your process. And it's just wonderful to be able to sit back and say, hey, I don't have to stress about these things. I don't have to worry about, I don't have to worry about jail. I don't have to worry about drugs. I don't have to worry about these knives or whatever is happening. You can just sit back and say, hey, God's got me covered.
Yep. And when it gets really bad, you got somebody to talk to all the
Yeah, for
time.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, prayer is a relationship. Talking to
Mm-hmm.
God really is.
Yep.
Um, I'm actually writing a few books on it. Um, Not yet published, but I'm hoping to get published. So God's just wonderful about that. And if I could encourage anybody, just who's ever struggling, is to just to let go and just let God. And if you can't, bring yourself to under your own power, if you need to, go ahead, go to jail if you need to fix your life that way. It
Yeah.
is an option.
Go to jail. Go to commit yourself to a psych ward for a few weeks or something.
Well, now that's pushing it. No, I'm just kidding.
I found some people that did help though.
But
But you've got to open yourself up to that help before you're going
exactly.
to get anywhere.
And to get the, yeah, I mean, like I said, you're going to have that negative things in jail, but I guarantee you it's not as, if you have God there, it's not going to be nearly as bad as what you're facing in your life right now.
Right. You've got a loving God who wants to take care of you. He offers us protection, and some comfort and healing. And we all need that in our life. We may
Absolutely.
not have been alcoholics or drug addicts or anything of that nature, but we all have parts of our life that is hard for us, that has hurt us. And, we all need healing in some respect. And,
Absolutely.
and so that walk with the Lord is what brings all of my guests really on here back to healthy and fulfilled lives.
Oh yeah.
There's always going to be a struggle. There's no way you can take the struggles out of life, but just know that there's someone there to help prop you up or lift you up, whatever the case may be. And
Carry
you
you,
can
really.
find other Christians around the world that'll stand with you. They'll pray with you, whatever the case may be.
Exactly.
And that's probably the most important thing you can do for somebody. Pray for them.
And let God handle him.
Mm-hmm. Because there's so many times that we can't handle anything.
No, we can't. It's about yielding to God and the higher power. And as long as you're not willing to yield, you're always going to stay in your own muck.
Mm-hmm. So Anyway, we've reached the end of our time, and the boss of the world back there is giving us signals. So
Yep.
we want to
Got
thank you
it, got
again for joining us, and thank you, Jared, for coming again this week.
You're
And
welcome.
we'll see you all next week. Thank you so much.